Welcome to the BrettJohnson.biz podcast, where we discuss business on purpose, radically fresh leadership, capital that transforms society, and marketplace stories that embolden difference makers. Welcome to the Repurposing Business podcast. Going into 2023, about 70% of people, according to a Deloitte study, said that they planned to quit their jobs during the year. There are ongoing Reddit threads and other conversations about why people don't want to work. Some people speculate that it's because there isn't work-life balance. Others talk about an inequity of pay between the so-called CEOs or the C-suite and regular workers. What do you think it is? Why is it that people are not so keen to work? Some time ago, I put out a blog about the fact that work was under attack, and some of it is philosophical, if you like. Some of it is practical. The reality is there's quite a lot of churn in the job market. And so what happens when people lose their jobs? And what is the answer? Well, if you look at the statistics, many people who lose their jobs, quit or change jobs, actually plan to start their own business. So the younger generations would be the highest target over there. So 76% of Gen Z and millennials say that they aspire to actually start their own business. And as you creep up in the age ranges, then you get into lower percentages. So 63% of Gen X and older, according to a Microsoft survey of 20,000 people. So 63% all the way up to 76%. But if you look at that, it's an interesting statistic, because you can also Google what percentage of businesses actually fail. And the statistics vary. Some will say 70% of businesses fail in the first 5 years. Others will say it's 90%, 95%. And yet, people still want to go ahead and be their own boss or start their own entrepreneurial journey. I've recently written a book called LEMONpreneur, and LEMONpreneur looks at a different approach to the entrepreneurial journey. And this is important because when we study leaders around the world, and we've done this for well over 20 years, thousands and thousands of leaders, we find that only about 12% are wired as entrepreneurs. So this makes the statistics even more difficult if you believe you need to be an entrepreneur to succeed as an entrepreneur. Or is there a better way? So let's unpack that a little bit. In the LEMONpreneur book, I explore the fact that there are global challenges going on, serious challenges, and it's not just wars in the Middle East or in Ukraine or in other parts of the world. It's not just genocide of the Armenians, which we don't hear much about, or other things. The reality is, on a global scale, some things have actually got a lot better. But there is a need for work, for job creation, and the big corporations, for various reasons, are not creating jobs at a rate quick enough to absorb those coming into the marketplace. So there are global challenges. Secondly, there are local problems when you look country by country or city by city. There are many local issues which could best be solved by good, solid businesses, not by a government program or by a non-profit organization. And why is this? And it's because business is a force for good, or business can be a force for good if it's not corrupted. Sadly, the emphasis on shareholder value has often meant that CEOs or executives in larger companies, public companies, pander to shareholders rather than doing what's best for employees and customers. So that does create a problem. But aside from that, business can still be a force for good. You might have seen Mark Andreessen's Techno-Optimist Manifesto, where he makes a great case for technology. Technology is great. Tech companies are great. They create jobs. They bring about new waves in the economy and so on. Down at the smaller level, there's a whole movement of business as missions or business for transformation or social enterprises, B corporations, corporations or businesses that have a noble purpose, if you like. And there's a recognition that business can be a force for good. And then finally, many government or NGO programs are not sustainable without an economic model. So there is a huge need for entrepreneurs. But if you put that against the failure rates, there's a challenge. Obviously, if you need tons of entrepreneurs, but the failure rates are so high, there is a challenge. And when you go back to the traditional wisdom or conventional wisdom, somebody has said, according to business owners, reasons for failure include money running out, being in the wrong market, a lack of research, bad partnerships, ineffective marketing, and not being an expert in the industry. Listen to those things. Not enough capital, not good enough people, the market wasn't there, didn't read the market well, didn't spend enough on marketing and so forth. And then he says, well, how you can avoid that is to set goals. Duh. I mean, that's not very, compelling. Accurate research, loving the work, and not quitting. I mean, really, really, really lame in terms of both the analysis of the problem and the proposed solution. So in the book LEMONpreneur and the upcoming LEMONpreneur class that we're going to have towards the end of January 2024, I'm exploring why those reasons aren't actually great reasons as to why the entrepreneurial journey is difficult. And yeah, startups do fail. And there is a challenge that patient capital is not actually very patient. Capital wants to move towards producing a good return. And then I've mentioned the issue that only 12% of people are in fact wired as entrepreneurs. And so there are things stacked against people who start their own business or become part of a new startup. But still, we do it again and again and again. So we need to rethink entrepreneurship. Not just what it is, but how we approach the whole area of entrepreneurship. Unfortunately, economic systems have pretty much fueled those who say, look, we're going to take, say, a pot of money that's 100. We're going to throw it at 10 companies, fully expecting 7 out of the 10 to fail. But if one of the 10 can hit a home run, it will return more than 100, and we could start this all over again. That means that there's a lot of heartache, a lot of wasted effort, a lot of dysfunction built into the system. There must surely be a better way. Now, part of the dysfunction that's built into the system is because of the economic incentives, but we'll unpack that as we go. So we need to rethink entrepreneurship. We need a different approach to what I'm calling the e-journey or the entrepreneurial journey. And so let's explore this a little bit. The reality is that from my perspectives, there's 5 types of leaders. Traditional leadership literature says there's 2 types, entrepreneurs and managers. And then they throw in the third wild category of quote unquote visionaries. But the truth is that I see 5 types of leaders: luminaries, entrepreneurs, managers, organizers, and networkers, hence Lemon leadership. So luminaries constitute, maybe about 10% of the population. The vast majority sit with organizers and networkers, and yet traditionally they are not regarded as leaders. So what do we do about this fact that there's only 15% of people who are wired as entrepreneurs? Does it mean that the rest cannot start their own business, cannot initiate something? Or is there a different solution to that? Firstly, everybody has some entrepreneur in them. If you think about 5 roots, if you like, the luminary, entrepreneur, manager, organizer, networker, you can have a primary and a secondary. So in my case, a luminary manager. But everybody has some entrepreneur in them. Why? actually because we're made in the image of God. So we're made to exercise faith. The book of Romans says that God has given to each a measure of faith. Now, faith and risk are two sides of the same coin. In other words, each of us has some capacity to risk. We might stifle it, we might suppress it, but the truth is we have some capacity to risk. So we have a measure of faith. Even if entrepreneur isn't our first slice, we're not in that 15%. It doesn't mean we can't be entrepreneurial. In fact, we need more people to be entrepreneurial, but the reality is that we're designed to be in teams where all 5 slices are represented, where there is an entrepreneur in the mix, a primary entrepreneur. Because failure comes not because of work-life balance, lack of capital, it's a bad product idea, and so on. The primary reason for failure of organizations, I believe, is leadership. It's a leadership issue. People don't understand who they are, how they're wired, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and the tendencies that they have as either luminaries, entrepreneurs, managers, organizers, and networkers. Their tendencies, their bias, their strengths, their weaknesses introduce an element of risk. And unfortunately, this is exacerbated by this notion that you have to be the CEO. You have to be the main person. Whereas in reality, you have to be part of a team. Now, if you understand how you're wired, you will understand that your approach to the entrepreneurial journey will be different depending on whether you're a networker or a manager or a luminary, for example. Each takes a vastly different approach to the entrepreneurial journey. And yet each brings a different type of capital. Now, our tendency is to value our type of capital above other types of capital. But when we have a respect for and appreciation for the 5 types of leaders, we will approach the entrepreneurial journey with a greater appreciation of what each brings to the party. So, we'll discover in this class, we'll talk about what type of capital does a luminary bring? What type of capital does a networker bring? I mentioned earlier the issue of the current capital models. So as I record this, I'm sitting in the San Francisco Bay Area. Here we have huge investment communities, angel investors, private equity, but venture capitalists, tons of venture capitalists. And the term sheets for venture capitalists, the rules of engagement have been skewed towards financial capital. And fairly enough, people take vast sums of money. They entrust them to VC firms. The VC firms set up funds that focus on particular industries, technologies, and so forth. And then the investors are either promised a return or hoping for a return. And the VCs, as managers or stewards of that fund, have to find good opportunities to put the money into it. Hopefully get some outsized returns. But when you look at the way that the deals are written, if you're a recipient of the funds, the contracts are skewed in favor of financial capital. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, if you're a person of faith, or if you're just a decent human being, you will know that there's many forms of capital. Intellectual capital, that's a good one. Yeah, financial capital as well. What about relational capital? Often networkers complain that people use their network, burn through their contacts, but they don't actually receive credit for that. Is that right? Managers are great at building organizational capital. Some companies have invested in their organizations over decades. There's an organizational capital that is key in organizations. There's also spiritual capital. It's not the only type, but there are many types of capitals, and yet our financial terms and conditions are written to favor financial capital. And so that's something that we need to look at as we respect the fact that each type of leader brings a different type of capital. Now, in the book I Operations, which Gary Dashent and I wrote a long, long time ago, we talk about 4 or 5 key things that happen in a business. You design products, you build them, you market them, you sell and manage. Prior to that, there's another piece of work that we do, which is actually defining the business. What's the purpose of the business? What's the need in the marketplace? What's the values? What's the value proposition? So this is how we define the business. And so once you've defined the business, then you've got to work on the products. How do you build them? How do you market and sell them? How do you manage the business as a whole? This is an ongoing cycle in the business world. Well, how you approach that will be skewed, flavored, biased, spiced up, influenced by how you wired as a leader. So the way you do it as a manager is quite different from the way you do it as an entrepreneur. The way you do it as an entrepreneur is very different from the way you do it as a networker. This is why some industries attract certain types of people. But as we go forward in the world of entrepreneurship, actually what we need is a more nuanced approach where what we're trying to do is actually bring together teams of people that represent the 5 facets of leadership so that we're not just looking at 1 or 2 of these. And sadly, just as the financial world has been skewed towards financial investors, particularly in the investor world of private equity and venture capital, so in the business world, the flavor of startups has been unhealthily biased towards entrepreneurs. This is one of the biggest reasons for business failure. So the reasons that you hear, I don't think that they're the real reasons. The bigger problem is leadership. And so each type of leader has huge blind spots. So you need to be in a team. And so I encourage you, get the LEMONpreneur book. It's not a complicated book to read. Take the assessments and sign up for the class. Why? Because we desperately need more entrepreneurs. I do quite a bit of work in Africa. Africa has an estimated 100 million entrepreneurs. Half of those live in Nigeria. And if each entrepreneur can create 3, 4, 5, or 10 jobs, it solves huge problems in Africa that no government can solve. I've worked with a company in Southeast Asia. In fact, it was part of the impetus for the LEMONpreneur book because they work with Gen Zers coming into the marketplace. Gen Zers who are just not going to find a job in a corporate, most likely, or not want a job in a corporate because of the statistics of 76% of new gen people, if you like, wanting to start their own business. But they're running into something. It's like going into a minefield and you've got a 5%, max 10% probability of getting across the minefield without being blown up. Is that smart? No. We need people to start businesses, to create products, to make things happen, to work with purpose and meaning. But the current approaches are just not adequate. And the excuses as to why businesses fail, I don't think that they're accurate. So we're going to unpack this in the LEMONpreneur class. If you don't take the class, at least read the book. And with the class, you can participate with others from around the world, have conversations, dig into these different topics, and figure out how you can mitigate the risks of entrepreneurship and enjoy the rewards. You're designed to be part of a team. Whether you're working at a corporate, you're working for yourself, and you can radically decrease the likelihood of failure if you understand these LEMONpreneur concepts. So I trust that you'll join us. One of the things that I do cover in the book, and we will cover on the course, is what are the risks? A fresh look at the self-destruction tendencies of each type of leader. Yeah, there's a risk that you don't have an MVP. There's a risk that you don't have enough capital. But the bigger risk is that because of your wiring, because of the way in which you're wired, you self-destruct and you kill the company. And it has to do with your identity and your willingness to grow, your willingness to be partnered with others as a leader. So join us. Generally, I don't do podcasts that are plugs for a particular course, but this is not the main point. The main point is that we need millions and millions and millions of entrepreneurs to come into the marketplace. But we don't want to send people into a war where the odds against them are 90%, 95%, and they're not equipped, they're not armed, they're not trained. And so that's the desire. We love entrepreneurship, we love entrepreneurs, we love to see people do well. And the world desperately needs a healthy E generation. We have Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. We need Gen E. We need a generation of wholesome, holistic, faith-filled, team-oriented entrepreneurs who can make a difference in the world. So I look forward to seeing you on the class. You can find out more details at brettjohnson.biz. Just poke around and you'll find the LEMONpreneur class that's coming up, and we'll put a link in the show notes. Thanks for joining us this week, and we'll see you next week.